Oh, hello.
You have employees today? Oh, a real small group.
Yeah, they're coming in slow. Just because I'm new and still learning, everyone, is it by chance Helen at the Philip Kennedy Wong?
No, Philip Kennedy Wong is just a community member who's out there watching us. Thank you for being here, Philip.
Perfect. Thank you for letting me know.
Well, I think we'll just jump in and if more folks arrive, we'll bring them in because I got a lot today and I would love some feedback from somebody who's not just me, who's been reading this over and over again. um, so for our July meeting, we'll do kind of our regular call to order, public comment, and then we're going to go from there, I think, right into reviewing proposals. And I'll remind folks of the uh, green, yellow, red, the group agreement. And then this is where I'd love some feedback. I've created 5 different slides. Each one has a different goal and a couple of options. It looks a little bit different than the on mechanism for ongoing review, just because there's actually like a lot of content. I was having a hard time making those nice big buckets the way I was able to do for the mechanism for ongoing review. But so I'm trying to decide, like, do I go through all of them? Do we just start with one, plow through it until we're done? Do I reorder these and try to figure out which one's the easy one to go first? I'm assessing a couple of
Give a
other tools.
sample? Can you give a sample?
I will in just a minute. Yeah, I'm going to show you the whole thing in just a minute. I'm trying to give you an idea of like all the questions that I have. So you know what kind of feedback I need. So part of it is the order. I'm working on a couple of other tools so we can have some more interactive engagement, maybe more places where people can like put in notes or like vote and stuff. But I think I think what I expect to happen is that we review these in July and August. Some we might come to decision on in July and some roll over into August. But I definitely don't want the first time we're looking at it in August, right? I want to make sure everyone has a sense of what they are in July, because by August I want to be done. We've made all of our votes. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the slides so you can take a look. So this is the procurement practices for supporting livable wages. So there was kind of three buckets I kind of pulled from this. Again, this is one of those, like, maybe some of them can work together, maybe they don't. So we have prevailing wage, wages and standard board, and then prospective budgeting. So I think the prevailing wage we've talked about, and the wage boards in the subcommittee meetings is just kind of like these third party entities that start to set a standard that then contractors have to meet. The prospective budgeting is more like kind of working within our existing system. So these were some of the comments that came around about like obtaining those investments, more doing it like a bid rather than the budget is approved. Now you have to contract or do all the things in the contract with this budget, even if that budget isn't enough to do that work, right? Because that's where we currently are. And try to like actually introduce more of the true cost of these programs into the state budgeting process. So that's kind of what that one is geared towards. And Felisa, do you want to provide feedback as I go, or do you want to see all of them?
I think I would like to provide as I go because my brain already feels full.
Okay.
So here's what's coming up for me. This is great. As usual, Mercedes, we don't deserve you. With the filled in bullet points, kind of titles, for me, I think it would help if it just like a little more around like create a prevailing wage standard. create a wages and standard board. I would love to
Yeah.
see some action words.
So if you remember, so I want some feedback on that, because if you remember last time, it was just like the buckets, and then as we discussed, then I pulled up the language that was like establish and create. But you want to start with that language as opposed to me gathering that in the discussion.
Fair.
No, I truly, like, because that was the first time we did it that way, right? We don't have to do it that way. If we feel like we should start with more scaffolding, I can definitely do that.
I am mindful that wordsmithing is not always helpful. And I'm also mindful that it's the people that show up that get to shape what things are. Okay, well let's look at the other slides, but that's something that's coming up for me.
Okay, we'll put a pin in that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think I like to think about it as degrees of scaffolding, right? Is this enough scaffolding to guide our conversation, or do we need more or less? Okay. So then this is the uniform application procedures. These, I think all these actually can go. So one of them was the statewide grant management database platform, and kind of like what that could achieve, what problems it could help solve. Establishing the program years, something we talked about in the subcommittees as well, just trying to offset those timelines, give ourselves the time it actually takes to do contracting, just bake it in. And then the creating of the new administrative rule, which would house a lot of these different concepts and like guidelines, because anything here will need more direction than I think what's provided. And so creating this kind of creates a container for if there's more specificity around different rules that are needed for grants, including specifying when you should be doing a grant versus when you should be doing a contract. So I think that's one of the confusing pieces here. And my suggestion here is that grants are contributions to existing work. Basically, the work would happen whether or not the state was paying for it, versus a contract, which should be specific, unique, and closed access program. So if the state is like, we want this housing program that we dictate who's eligible and we dictate what services they get there and how long they're able to be there, that is a specific, unique, and closed access program. That is a contract. Versus we got $4 million to build La Plaza Esperanza. The state is not deciding who gets to be at La Plaza, what La Plaza does. We would be building it if they didn't contribute anyway. So that is a grant. And I think those are good examples of the difference. But I think we know at like a high level that we're not falling neatly into those kind of buckets. And we have, things that are said to be grants that are actually contracts, and not really the other way around though. But the standard contract language. So I would say the first bullet is kind of a punt, right? It's saying, instead of saying what the standard contract language should be, it's like convene a group to look through all the templates and make some consistency recommendations and update recommendations. Clearly delineating in the contract what terms are negotiable and which ones are not. I think that would be actually like reorganizing those templates to be clear about that, and how those contracts are, how the drafts are then shared with providers. And then using the contracts to differentiate advance payment versus reimbursement, and when those kind of things should take place. And so part of this is, I think, one, even if the state agencies are interested in moving to advance payment, they're not all going to move all at once. And so how do we have kind of a dual process here where we're just providing guidance on when you can or should do advance payment versus when it's okay to do reimbursements and what those structures should entail there. And then trade-offs, right? So one of the things with the reimbursement contracts that a lot of providers struggle with is that they don't pay for the full cost of service, but you still have to report on 100% of the services you're providing, and you're still limited on who you can provide those services to or how you can provide those services. So, which is kind of just blatantly unfair, right? You want 100% control, but you don't want to pay 100% of the costs. So more kind of telling to agencies, if you're not going to fully cover the cost because of your own budget limitations, that's fine. But then you need to show how you're alleviating some restriction for that provider so that they can maybe raise funds from somebody else who also wants to purchase services in that same program. And then the insurance requirement one, this is one that was kind of inconsistent, right? Some agencies were like, you can cover the required insurance with your contract funds or grant funds, and some you didn't and you can't. And so this would just make it standard that like any insurance requirements that are above and beyond standard business practice, in other words, those that are determined by the DAS matrix, then have to be covered by the award. And if that requires increasing the award in order to maintain outcomes, then they'll need to do that. But they could probably avoid this by calculating it in earlier. I think I kind of get the sense that the matrix happens later in the process. And so this would also kind of just try to push that practice earlier. So when they publish their RFPs, they're also publishing insurance requirements. Oh, go for it.
Oh, beautiful. No, that's just a kudo.
Oh. And then on sufficient reporting, I went actually back through my notes and we didn't have a ton in this area. So I pulled the ones that we did have, which were mostly trying to eliminate some duplication. So like trying to clearly delineate what is kind of basic versus what is enhanced, and that basic should be covered by a regular admin rate, enhanced need to be funded better. For programs where there is no admin rate, I think that also creates a lot of questions there. And then trying to extend, like if you're collecting reporting that's based on participant outcomes, that it has to be a longer period of time, right? Like if you're just collecting program reporting on like how many people I served versus I want to collect reporting on whether or not people are stably housed 12 months after being in your program. Well, if I have a 12-month program and you want to know about their stability 12 months after the program, then I need a minimum 2-year commitment, right? And starting to kind of try to push those timelines out. And then realistically, my first year, I'm maybe doing 6 months worth of programming. So if you really want that follow-up data on it, participant outcomes, we're looking at a minimum of 3 years, more 5-year commitment in order to see that change over time. Now that I'm thinking about my notes, I think there actually might be something in here about I think it's kind of a question I have for some of the state agencies, like, is the duplication on purpose? Because I could see an argument for, we make you submit the same report 3 different ways because we're trying to catch an error. And the best way to catch an error is to actually have you report it differently. And if you report it differently here than you did there, then maybe there's an error. I could see somebody having thought that was a good idea, right? But like trying to kind of
time, like that seems
well, it's not
staff intensive.
But I think the way it's structured is it's staff intensive on the provider and not on the state agency, because it's a different person reviewing a different body of work, right? The financial staff are reviewing and the program staff are reviewing, but the program staff are also asking for financial data, even though they're not necessarily the ones on the hook to review it. The financial staff might be on the hook to review it, but they're still both requesting it because that's how their system, like they want a narrative report where you put it in a spreadsheet, but then they also want you to upload it into the database system. But I don't think on the state side, it's the same people reviewing that. So they don't have a duplication of effort, just we do.
Okay.
But it'd be a great clarification to get, I think, to try to understand why do you need reports like that? And then the payments for full cost recovery. So the 15% de minimis. This was a great idea someone else suggested, which was like, if you can't do admin funds, if like whatever source of funding you have is not going to allow it, then just structure it as general operating. And that alleviates a lot of strain on the reporting side, which is oftentimes what you use the admin money for. Wanted to make sure that we're not cutting folks off who may already have a higher negotiated rate. And then the stipulation here around like not departments not keeping funds at the expense of the nonprofit partner. So if there is a limit on admin, they take care of the contractor first and the agency second, rather than the agency first and the contractor second. And then consistent tracking of payment. And so that was just to start there, because I think what we learned from the state agencies is, for the most part, people aren't tracking how long payments take to get out. So we weren't really able to get a good self-assessment. Like, do you think you're paying on time? Do you think you're delayed in payment? Folks didn't really have a sense of that since it's not something they're regularly tracking. So we're going to start there. The recommendation is simply to track it. And then looking at that inconvenience fee or an advanced payment model, you could avoid that problem. And then somebody was asking about, like, how do we get a better sense of the gap between what the agencies are paying and what it costs to do the work? And I think that's a really big body of work, because effectively what you're asking is each contract manager needs to request from each provider, send me your actual expenses for running this program. And then I can look at, this is what we're paying, and this is what it actually costs for you to do the work. I actually don't know if state agencies realize that that's probably where they're getting discrepancy issues, is that my expense budget is the expense of the program, but what the state agency wants is the expenses to their funds. And so I have to delete things to move it over for a report for a state agency. And so we're essentially hiding that information. Like, we don't even know how underfunded some of these contracts are. So this would be like a recommendation for additional research to actually go through and do that process. I know the OHA did it with behavioral health providers probably like 4 years ago now, and found a 60% differential between what they were paying and the total expenses of the inpatient programs. And that resulted eventually in a 50% increase to those contracts, right? So that essentially kind of repeating that same type of work, but that's a lot of work. And so the recommendation to do more work. And I think that's it. Yeah, lady. Okay. I need to make a note here. I need to add something about duplication. Right about that one.
Am I understanding correctly that it's your hope that we would be able to vote on all of these between our July and August meeting?
Yes. So what we would do is what we kind of did last time, is we would have these, and then we'd have a bunch of discussion. What do you like? What's missing? What would make the difference? And then as people are providing that feedback, that's when I'm starting to actually draft in real time what the recommendation language looks like. So it may be that we get a lot of debate and consolidation, and then we're able to maybe vote on one or two, and then others have to go to a subsequent meeting where we kind of then refresh. This is what we were debating, consolidating around. Because some of these I think I can do in real time, just the way I did the ongoing mechanism for review. Some of these I think will be too much discussion, and I won't be able to do it in real time. So I'm the one who will need it to go to August so that I can rewrite the language to bring it to a point where it can be where it can be voted on.
A couple of things. I mean, part of me is just like, I think it might be helpful to post these slides in advance, so people read them and digest them. Even though they should be pretty familiar, it's still a lot of content. Part of me was thinking, like, the last slide, I think slide 8, like, it's like, oh, that one's like perfect. I think we're all in agreement based on the conversations that have happened. So part of me says, like, start with that one. I start getting stuck on some details. I think it's now slide 5. Yeah. This was a question we asked DOJ, which they said they wouldn't answer. The first sub bullet around, like, you know, if the state were contracting with Latino Network, do they only have say in the staff who's being funded by the grant, or can it, as an example, you know, if there was a new law, if we were to write a new law that says the state can't contract with organizations where CEOs make more than 5 times their lowest paid full-time staffer. I'm throwing out examples.
Yeah.
We don't even know that. Am I going too far?
No, you're fine. So in my reading, and I would love if if NAO wants to submit some public comment to this in July. So in doing my own reading, because yes, the DOJ would not answer this question for us. In doing my own reading, the way I kind of differentiated prevailing wage from the standards board is that the prevailing wage would be limited to the contract in question. So even just that contract. So like Latino Network is doing that contract. And so it's that contract that has to meet a different wage requirement in the contained time in which it exists. So like if it goes away, then that requirement also goes away for me. For the wage for the board, for the standards board, my understanding is the standards board is specific to a sector of a body of work, and so therefore could make recommendations regardless of contracts, but would then be able to provide guidance to the agencies when you are contracting with somebody who's under the purview of this board. You must provide this level of funding per FTE to be able to do this work at a minimum, or you have to collect, this wage data before building your budget for what you think you can purchase to make sure that you're not putting a contractor in a position where they'd have to underfund a position beyond the standards the board has established. That's what I think is the difference there. That the prevailing wage would be contract limited, but the standards board could have a broader sphere of influence, both in that sense, providing guidance to the state agencies that when you are building budgets for bodies of work you are attempting to purchase, you have to take in this to account. I'm hoping that gets us into that perspective budgeting a little bit, where they're collecting bids for work rather and then building that into, okay, based on the bids that we got, we can only afford to buy 50 shelter beds when we were hoping to buy 100, but now they know how much they can actually afford to purchase, rather than putting out an RFP for 100 beds and collecting a bunch of prospective budgets from people, choosing one, and then line item going through it to make it fit budget, right? So just trying to move that in a different direction. But that's what I think is that would be why we have these kind of two options that are separate.
That makes sense. Thank you.
And could a standards board do the CEO thing? I think maybe, but I don't know. I mean, why not, right? If it's for the sector, I think.
So for the meeting, is your vision like, okay, folks vote green, yellow, red, prevailing wage standards and sub bullet points. Then we vote. Is it the whole page?
No, it would definitely be, we would have this up and we would start having this discussion. And then I would start to pull out of that where I thought I was hearing consensus, and then bring that up and start asking for the green, yellow, red, right? So like if I'm hearing from people, the wage standards board, then I would ask, all right, so it sounds like we're getting to a recommendation around the standards board. If that's where you want to kind of consolidate some of this language, green, yellow, red. And if there's a whole bunch of reds, then we take a pause. We assess, all right, reds, where are you at? And they're like, we all want the prevailing wage and we're not moving, right? Then I'll be like, all right, we're going to set this one aside. We're going to go to the next one and we'll come back, right? So that's more of kind of the way I see it moving, is that the recommendation itself that we're voting on, like I'm using the green, yellow, red to move the language where I see the group going, and using that as an indicator for me, what is most interesting to folks. And like, it's possible, like I said, when I did the first one, I was like, we're probably just going to pick one of these, right? And we did an amalgamation of all three of them. So like that might happen too, but it is a little bit in, I think, real time. I kind of want to put this, like, both, I want this one to go first, but I also almost want this one to go last, because I do feel like this is such a big discussion.
Yeah.
And a little bit of it also is still a punt, right? In the same way of like putting together the stakeholder group to review the training materials and the guidebooks, like we're not we're not necessarily making the link. We didn't go through all of the books and start to line item, edit them with recommendations at that granular level. And so this is also a similar thing where either the prevailing wage or the wage standard would be a whole body of work on its own, probably need a whole task force and like a whole thing to get it going. The perspective budgeting, less so. I think that's a little bit more about changing practice for how contract managers collect information from their vendors or contractees, or I don't like vendors. Vendor feels like plumber. Contractees.
Yeah, I mean, part of me says if we could get through 4 and 5 in July, that would be amazing. Because for whatever reason, I feel like 4 is like, heck yeah, green, green, green. And this one, I mean, I don't think people are going to disagree, but it's like, how strong is our language going to be?
Yes.
I think,
absolutely. I think these are ones, this one and the one about, where'd it go? And the one about like the stakeholder review. I feel like we almost want to put like dates on those things, that like there needs to be some sort of next step in the next 12 months or something. Because they are big bodies, because they are just recommendations for additional bodies of work. If we don't put some sort of time frame around it, I think those become the easiest to just kind of shelve.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. I think having some dates, by end of calendar year, fiscal year, by end of long session, can add some accountability. Yeah.
And some of this also might be assigning a little bit of work, right? Maybe our mechanism for ongoing review is to maintain a body like the task force. Maybe the first body of work for that new advisory board is this, right? And kind of putting that into our language, that's the expectation, is that the first thing that group does once it's convened is start going through the handbooks and the templates and the materials.
Yeah, I was going to ask, do we want to prioritize any of this?
Well, we're going to do the big prioritization quadrant.
Got it.
That's how we're gonna have to plot these guys.
Okay. Thanks for all this work. My goodness.
I'm very nervous. It just feels like so many words on a page.
Yeah. One of the, and maybe this is part of the ongoing mechanism of review, I had mentioned like something that Multnomah County did with their animal shelter is kind of had like a, oh my God, matrix. That's not the right word. But they have a website you can visit where it's like, oh, well, how are all the things that they promised going? But of course, this isn't like a promise. This is a recommendation. So I'm just thinking out loud right now because I want accountability, and I want groups like NAO and anyone that's part of the committee to be able to check in 6 months and a year and be like, well, what happened to that? My hope is that Senator Campos will be able to attend the next meeting and maybe partake in any public ways we get to talk about these recommendations. But she's one of 90. We need other allies. So yeah, I guess I'm kind of stuck on the accountability piece, but no one has to do the recommendations. That's just our world.
Yes, I know. That's honestly the hardest part for me, I think. And I said it maybe like 3 different times in the last meeting. It's going to have to be okay with the fact that I am only baking the cake. I don't get to frost the cake. I have to give it to someone else and just trust that'll happen. And that's not me.
Yeah.
I was joking with someone else that I was like, this is why I've never been drawn to consulting work, because I always feel like you came in and you did a bunch of work and you left and you have no idea if we finished it. I could not live that way.
Yeah.
is there anything about the formatting or the structure? So I hear you saying let's get it out early, which I think that's easy. I can finish these up today, and maybe we can even get this out in an early email Monday. And then, but yeah, how?
Yeah, I
Anything
think
about structure? Yeah.
I don't think it would hurt to remind folks of what our assignment is via the bill, which is those top headlines that we have, that we're adopting the structure that's in the bill. It's like make recommendations on these things. So those are our buckets. Yeah.
Let's go back to the comment you made at the beginning around how much should the language already feel like it's recommendation language versus ideas. I would say it's mostly structured like ideas right now.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I am a person that wants strong language. So, not quite force, but establish, invest in, research, create, just making it as, I mean, and maybe that's not necessarily in the PowerPoint, but it's in the final version of, because I want a legislator to be reading our recommendations and it to be so freaking clear what the nonprofit community is saying. Not wage standards. Create a wage standards board that will set wage standards for the sector.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're telling you how to get this done. How nice are we? Making it easy.
Visually, how does this work? How did this work for you? Just PowerPoint slides.
It's fine. I mean, I appreciated that you used a very simple font. It's easier on the eyes. Yeah, and I think especially if people read it in advance, I think it's fine.
Okay. I was thinking about bringing in some additional tools that are like a little bit interactive meeting-ish stuff where people would actually like vote and could see each other's votes instead of just the chat. And I have figured out a way to record people's votes if I do it that way, because I have to do it because it can't be, anonymous. But then we would still do the final vote in the chat. So there's a record of it in the chat instead of in the tool. And then the tool would be things like you can give a sense of scale, like when looking at these three options, which one is like most interesting to least interesting. I don't know if those things help or just create. I do want a way of collecting people's language. I think especially for some of the more complicated ones, like what you're describing right now, in that kind of like giving the language that feels actionable, straightforward. It doesn't feel muddled. It doesn't feel like it's too passive. So kind of like trying to figure out another way to collect that. I know not everybody is like, this is how I'd want it said. Most people have kind of like a feeling of like, I want it to feel like that, but don't necessarily know what the words are. So I don't want to put people on the spot, but I also want to make sure I have a variety of ways for folks to share their thoughts, I guess.
I don't know. I'm just thinking about in like middle school or high school when I got a list of like action verbs and had action verbs to pull from as I improve my writing. Yeah, I'm mindful of, I don't want us to spend an hour on, wordsmithing a sentence. Like we don't have time for it. But I don't think like establish, create, research, like I don't think those are that strong, but I mean, if people have a better word, maybe it's like, okay, you get to make one word change per slide.
Okay, but I think I'm hearing you say that it might be helpful for me to put just a little bit more of those kind of words, because I do think in some places I've kind of flirted with that, like the create a new set of organ administrative rules, like that uses that word.
Mhm.
So I have it in some places. It's not consistent throughout. So I could just do that, right? Just like give it a little bit more actionable language so that it doesn't trigger that thing in people's heads, but more it would be like instead of create, I want to use mandate, right? Like then we're
Mhm.
actually changing the word and not getting caught up on the fact that it's not there or that it doesn't feel actionable. Like try to kind of just remove that element by putting a little bit more of that scaffolding in. Like I think I can do that. And it wouldn't take very long.
Okay.
And then it'd be easier for me to copy and paste it later and create like the recommendation.
Okay. Another thought is is there a bucket for like other things that came up during our learning? And I'm in a way I can't think of an example. But another way I feel like so like oh wait I'd have to check my notes, but I think it was OHA that mentioned like they need more data analysts in order to do their work quicker. I want to check my notes. I don't want to say that. So I don't want to say I'm 100% right. But part of me says like, is this an opportunity to add some addition, additional thoughts of like some of these agencies need more staff. Um, and it's not a magic fix, but it's like I don't want to lose that.
So is this too small or can you see this piece?
I can see it.
So during the meetings, something started to come out that felt like narrative, right? That didn't neatly fit into one of our 6 buckets. And so I started to group them here. So things like calling out that tension between outcomes and risk and compliance, understanding that true cost better, the culture change piece that I think Danesh has talked a lot about. Um, building stair steps within these recommendations, like when we present them, saying like these things are also meant to build on each other, so you don't have to do everything immediately, but if you do these things, you can see how things will continue to get improved and you'll continue to build efficiency. um, and the data analytics piece, so like that's where I've started to put some of those kind of things, is like the stuff that we're going to want to have in the executive summary, in the report, but is not necessarily its own standalone recommendation to achieve the livable wages, right? Because I don't know if data analytics, I can
Yeah.
draw a super straight line to achieving livable wages, right? But I also think it's bonkers the amount of information we submit to the state and nobody is sitting there comparing programs to each other. Like you could write dissertations on stuff like that. Like there's so much information that we're not doing enough with. So like it needs to be said, but it's not necessarily a straight line to the goal. So that's where I started to kind of put some of these things. I don't have them on a slide or anything. I could create kind of like a narrative, something kind of container where folks who have more of those thoughts that they really want to make sure that they're getting out a lot of the why, right? I mean, I think that we don't have to really convince anybody of the why because we made it this far, we got the task force. But I think these things are also important to understanding the impact that the changes could make if we're actually committed to some very straightforward contract reform.
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea that like some of the ahas that we've learned will be part of the narrative. And that tells a greater story of like this isn't working. It's not set up for and here's examples of how it's not even set up for success. Um yeah, sounds great.
So do you think that these should be on a slide for the July meeting, or like how do I make sure that folks know we are capturing these things, and if they have more of these, we can capture them?
I mean, part of me says that I I probably wouldn't be the only one that brought it up, so maybe have it ready, but on
Okay.
back burner. Because
Yeah.
maybe no one else will bring it up.
No, I think it's a good that I can definitely put it in. I'll put it on a little slide and I'll keep it as like a hidden slide or like just the last slide. So if someone's like, I really feel like we're missing something on this, and be like, no problem. I'll take a note of that right now and I'll show you where it's going to live later. Because then I can track it as we go. There's another thing that I do, we do have now a writer who is helping to do some writing for us. And I do want to give them some of these like narrative pieces to start working in. And then thinking about how we build out a report that people can like see and provide like last round comment to. I mean, hopefully it won't be too complicated. Hopefully by the end, there won't be too much wordsmithing. Like, I'd be so sad if someone saw the final report and like, this wasn't anything that we talked about. Like,
No, I mean this is all stuff. I mean, part of me is like it's not surprising, but it's also more specific than what we would have come up with last fall if we had just without the presentations.
I think so.
The presentations have been such a gift, and I've loved hearing from the agencies themselves around their ideas. You know, it's clear that they also see room for improvement.
Yes, I agree. And this has been really helpful also in the local conversations, because I'm also on, well, yeah, the Tri-County Planning Body, and we have a whole thing there about like contract reform as well. And at the last meeting, the counties were supposed to come in July. And in the June meeting, I like made a bunch of comments about like what I've learned in this space about like that kind of personal weight of risk and compliance, and how critical it is to people's jobs, and that this is the way they know how to do it. And I was like, so if you feel that way too, if like this is the only way you know how to have accountability, and you don't want to let certain things go, even if you might be hearing from someone else that it just feels like admin burden, say that out loud. Like, tell me that that's the tool that you need, because then I know what I'm working with, what I'm working around, what is changeable, what is not changeable, and we just start getting more realistic with our recommendations. And so yeah, I mean, I feel like there's nothing in here that nobody is doing. I think that's another key one, that we have heard from all these different departments, all these different versions of contracts that they're running and reporting and procurement and partnership. And there's nothing on here that at least one agency isn't doing, which means that we're all capable of doing it. So I'm also not telling you to do something that's impossible that you've never done before. I may be telling you to take something that only one division of one agency is doing and get that whole agency to do it. And that is a lot of work, but at least I know you're capable of it. I know you have structures in place to make this capability work.
That also tells me it's legal.
Yeah.
In advance, it's legal to give the entire 15%. Like no new laws technically have to be created. A lot of this could be done with culture change instead of mandates.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of opportunity that, like, I think even, and some opportunity for us to educate legislators, because I remember, I'm forgetting exactly who it was, but we were talking about this, and I mentioned, hoping that we could open the door to more like 3 to 5 year contracts. And she was just like, oh, they can't do that. And I'm like, are you sure? Because I think I know some people who have like multiple year, like beyond biennium contracts. And she was really, really sure that agencies were not allowed to do that under their current authority. And what we learned in this process is that they absolutely are, and they absolutely do.
Do you think that we
And
could talk about that in our narrative of like, if we're saying multi-year contracts, example, Delk or OHA, whoever, of just like, because I think that's a really strong point that you're making, and I think that would really move legislators of like, oh, it's actually already happening. And like, such a theme of this is that, my goodness, for organizations working with multiple agencies, multiple departments, like it is so different in each sub-department. And then it's like, it's true, everything's so different. And it turns out there's pieces that are working really, really well and can help organizations thrive so that the state can accomplish its goals. So take a little bit from DELC, take a little bit from OHA, take a little bit from another group. I just don't want to lose it. I feel like that's our opening statement, Mercedes.
You are capable of all of these things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just saw like the ODE is going to be putting out their new student success plan RP in October. It's a 5-year contract.
That's awesome.
I'm like, you see, we can do this.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, okay, so I have my marching orders. I'm gonna clean this up a little bit. I'm gonna put in a little bit of actionable language just to help build that scaffolding. And Summer, if I'm able to get this to you at the end of day tomorrow, would you be able to send it out on Monday? Or is that too soon for like the agenda and everything?
No, I think that can absolutely happen. That was one of my questions I was going to ask you, is when you wanted that posted. So that'll work by end of day tomorrow. And then if it's okay, I want to draft the agenda. I don't know if I caught it all correctly, and then send it to you, Mercedes, just to make sure that the agenda is correct to also be posted.
Perfect. Yeah. So let's do that Friday, Monday morning-ish. Because then, yeah, people will have about a week with the material to look over.
Perfect. Thank you, Mercedes, so much. This was, as always, you're doing 80% of the work. It does not go unnoticed.
Well, I mean, again, I feel like it hasn't been too hard because I feel like we came in with a lot of actually good alignment. And I think the subcommittees ended up being very validating. Because I mean, I could have ended up going into those meetings and be like, oh my God, we haven't talked about any of this stuff. Like, where is this coming from? And I don't think there was anything that was a particular surprise, which I think was cool. But my opening question for this meeting will be, what has surprised you most in this process?
I like that. Okay.
All
Awesome.
right, well, why don't we go ahead and close a little early? Thank you so much for coming, Fleece, and being like my one sounding board. I really appreciate it. And you deserve kudos. You come to every single one of these meetings, I think. I think other than me, you are the only other one who's been at every meeting.
I'm kind of a Mercedes fangirl. That's one. And this work, I mean, I get everyone's busy. And so if I'm able to make it, yeah, my absolute pleasure. And I'm sure the conversation will go well, and we're going to have a great report that hopefully legislators take and go do great things with it. So.
Absolutely. Okay.
Have a great day.
Have a good evening, everybody.